Well, we are a couple days removed from the initial 53-man roster, and the Colts have made a slew of moves. A lot I think are good, some I'm confused of, and one that I think is going to at least bolster a room that needs as much help as it can get. We're going to cover all that and more on this video. What's going on? It's Elijah from Sports Talk Indy. We cover all things Colts. Today we're talking again about the rosters. What else are we going to talk about a week before the season? Talking about the quarterback battle. Daniel Jones is the guy recently named captain. We'll go over that in this as well. But now I want to talk about the roster signings because Colts cut the roster from 90 down to 53. Obviously, a lot of those guys expected to come back, but there were quite a few of which already signed with other teams. Juju Brents moved teams. And then you have Jelani Woods moving to another team as well. Loads of Colts players moved on. But one of the areas that I think a lot of us looked at the initial 53-man rosters with a lot of confusion, a lot of side eyes, is the linebacker room. The linebacker room only contained 4 guys. In most defenses, especially those run by the Colts, typically, you run at least 3 on the field at a time. But what in the heck was going on with this? Well, one has to do with the new defense. Lou Amarulo is known for running specifically more dime and nickel packages, which would feature less linemen and less linebackers, meaning that a guy maybe like Latu is going to play in a hybrid linebacker, outside linebacker's role, as opposed to being a designated defensive end. But this wasn't a need that was ignored by the Indianapolis Colts. Literally during a press conference the other day, Chris Ballard was actually suddenly told that the Colts had been cleared to claim Chad Muma off the waivers from Jacksonville. They also waived Tim Smith, who was their 6th-round pick from Alabama, but we'll get into that in a second. So, and initially, upon finding out that he had signed, that the Colts had cleared the waivers, they had signed Chad Muma, which means they put in a waiver order whenever their turn was up, which I believe is somewhere in the 12 range or whatever. Between 11 and 15, I think, is where the Colts land on the waiver wire. They were cleared. No one else wanted him except up until that point. So none of the 0 to 12 wanted him. Jacksonville obviously being the one that waived him. This Chad Muma guy, right? This guy who has spent his first 4 years as a Jacksonville Jaguar. Nothing crazy impressive coming out of, the first start, which is that he's 6'3", 220 or 239, 26 years old, college Wyoming. But I will say that the initial response of Chris Ballard was that if nothing else, this is going to serve as a serviceable guy who can who can start almost immediately, or at least be a B player coming off the bench while we wait for Jalen Carleys, who the Colts have said time and time again. They really believe that Jalen Carleys is the guy, is going to be a really, really good linebacker. Again, another guy that they converted from that defensive back to linebacker position. And this was a room that I think a lot of people saw there being need for some attention in the offseason. The 2 Colts linebackers who headlined this defense were Zaire Franklin and E.J. Speed. Now, you look at where they're at now. E.J. Speed obviously moved on to a different team. They did not even attempt to re-sign him in free agency this past year. But Zaire Franklin posted a lot of tackles. In fact, he was one of the leading tacklers in the league. But what was not on paper was the amount of missed tackles, was the separation, was the coverage. A lot of areas of which guy, like we talked about Hunter Warler before he was out with injury. We talked about Justin Wally before, again, he was out with injury. Both guys missing the season. It's going to be a big loss. I think the Colts were looking forward to seeing both of them. But you look at a guy like this, and I think this is where the Colts are really trying to address this need. And this guy like Chad Muma, who, again, he warranted attention, but just not from the first 15 in the waiver wire. I think this is a guy that, again, if Ballard's right about him, which again, who knows, he was a 3rd-round draft pick in the 2022 draft. He saw action in all 17 games, made 3 starts. 30 tackles, recorded 2 tackles and 1 solo. That's 2024. This is, I think, where I want to highlight what I think a guy like this brings to the table. Because the Colts have talked about consistency. The guys that they've brought in this past season, brought in free agency or via trade or signed and all this, have been guys who have not missed significant time due to injury. Guys that know how to play football, for one, and are also good at protecting themselves. So this is where I think is important to note on Chad Muma is He played in all 17 games. He played in all 17 games. He played in all or in 16 regular season games and both preseason games. Like that was back in 2022, 2023, and 2024. This is another guy of which the Colts are looking at and bringing in consistency. Let's talk about the other many waiver transactions or just signings because now that practice squad is open, there's a lot of movement. So let's talk about where the Colts have waived and signed. So on 8/26, they released Leo Herbert, Chris Lamons, Sean McCown, Duke Shelley, Laquan Treadwell, yada, yada, yada. Released and waived all of those guys. And then placed on injured reserve, designated to return Jalen Carley's. Again, hopefully back to see him in the week 5. But here is where they really started making moves, adding back to the practice squad a lot of guys that we liked in the preseason, and they signed Austin Ajake, Ulysses Bentley the fourth, tackle Marcellus Johnson, wide receiver Tyler Common, defensive end Darrell Chammy, Coleman Owen, Mose Vavo, Trey Washington, another guy that we really like to see in camp. Leo Herbert, a good back that we want to keep around just in case of injury. Chris Lamons, who had a lot of games last year that he played for the Colts. Sean McCown, Josh Stills, Josh Tupou, and then Max Millen Mange, designated as an internal practice player. They also signed Ben Nickel, Tyler Scott to practice squad, released Tyler Common from practice squad. This was the big one. They signed Laquan Treadwell to the practice squad and signed Tim Smith to the practice squad. Again, they just waived Tim Smith the other day off of the 53, brought him onto the practice squad. Now, that's a big deal. Tim Smith obviously being one of the draft picks. If you look at the past couple draft picks, it does seem as though the Colts are missing guys. Last year we talked about Micah Abraham, Jalen Simpson, Jalen Carley's obviously still being here but hurt. Guys like Tim Smith and Isaiah Land was another one from last year. Colts haven't been hitting on some of these later draft picks, which is what Ballard was bringing to the table. Again, not to be hypercritical on Ballard, we got plenty of space for that. But you look at what guys are bringing to the table right now, and these guys are just ending up back on practice squad. Now, league average is 40% of all players signed after round 3 will make a 53-man roster somewhere. So it's not crazy, but it is just a little bit below where the Colts have been historically. I think it's something to note. I think it's something of importance. Guy like Chad Muma, I really, really like. I really think he's got a lot to offer to this Colts team. Again, we'll talk later about the Colts bringing in the 5 captains or naming them based on player vote. There's an interesting couple of players that I think, again, worthy of note. But this is at least where we're at right now with this roster. Stick around. We'll see you on the next one.